Welcome to Rockhampton with Nyree, the podcast that celebrates the people, places, and stories that make Rocky and the wider central Queensland community extraordinary. I firmly believe we're sitting on a golden goose in this region, and I love meeting the people who are doing the quiet work behind the scenes to keep the community thriving. They run our sports clubs, they organise our charities, they support the people who are lost in the system, and they volunteer their time so generously. And I feel like the luckiest person in the world when someone shares their story with me privately. And now I'm privileged to bring their stories and achievements to you, the listeners of Rockhampton with Nyree. Sometimes they wonder why they were asked, thinking that what they're doing and what they've done is not that big of a deal. And I can hand on heart tell you that it absolutely is. Other times, my guests are ecstatic to be asked and they look forward to sharing a piece of their Rocky and Central Queensland story. Thank you for listening in. I truly appreciate you being here. Today on the podcast, we have Fabian Weber. Now, Fabian is the Homelessness Coordinator for Rosebery and is also the Community Lead for CQ Zone. So two of those businesses or not-for-profits we'll hear a lot about today. But Fabian does some incredible work in the homelessness space in Rockhampton and on the Capricorn Coast. And even just being connected with Fabian over the last couple of weeks leading up to this podcast, it really defined for me what it looks like when someone lives and breathes the job that they do and the care and the passion that they put into that sort of a service. So I really do thank you a lot, Fabian, for joining me today and talking about this very difficult and challenging topic. It is not something that we're proud of as a community or as a state or a country, but it's amazing to know that people like you are out there trying to close that gap for people that are in need.
Thanks, Nyree. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we really get stuck into it, I have one question to ask you, and that is, if you could be an expert at anything at all in the world, what would it be and why?
Such a good question. I like that. I think a lot of my focus these days is on systems. So I think if I could be an expert on anything, I'd be an expert on how systems fail quietly. So, those small design decisions and incentives, I guess, that look harmless on paper, but can create harm or inequality over time. So the kind of failure that doesn't trigger alarms, it just slowly forms. And I think if we could understand that better, we would be able to stop a lot of crises from happening in the first place.
Absolutely aligned with the work that you do, of course, because the system failure is evident in probably every rock that you overturn. As someone who's loves systems myself, as in systems both technology-wise as well as the systems that we work within and the structures, I completely resonate with that desire. So wouldn't it be amazing if we could be an expert in that? And that would just benefit your role immensely, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we see system failures on a daily basis, but if we could see them before they became a problem, we could do so much more.
And it inspires me when there's a lot that happens in the Rocky community and in every community where there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes by not-for-profits and organisations and charities that do close those gaps where system failures happen over time. And, the work that you're involved in is exactly one of those services. But then in itself, it is also subject to system failure as well, which challenging. There's no other word for homelessness. Homeless, I'm going to mess my words up. But no, thank you. So tell us a little bit about your story, those key moments in your life, what your journey looked like as you were growing up here in Rocky, going to school at Kawarral and Yeppoon, any key moments or people along the way that have really shaped you into the Fabian that we have today on the podcast.
Yeah, I think, obviously I'd have to start with my parents. So, they instilled a very strong sense of social justice in me, and that knowledge that inequality exists always, and to look out for that and to try to do what you can to assist in some way. Both my father served on Livingston Shire Council. My uncle was mayor of Rocky for 9 years, Jim Weber. So that that service, serving your community has been a big part of that. But I'd say, yeah, that awareness that life doesn't distribute opportunity evenly. I think I picked up on that fairly early. And I think knowing, that systems expect individuals to absorb that unfairness equally.
Mm.
Um, and that just has never sat well with me. And yeah, I guess it's just, I've always had that sense of if something's not right, we need to work towards fixing it. And just because the system says that this is the way it is, doesn't mean that we have to accept that, but that we
Mm.
can work to change the system and make sure that nobody is falling through the cracks.
Absolutely. What a solid grounding for the work that you do today. Tell us a little bit about what's involved in being the homelessness coordinator for this area, but also the community lead for CQ Zone. And for people like myself, who before we caught up and met didn't know what CQ Zone was, tell us a little bit about that.
CQ Zero brings the Advanced to Zero framework to Central Queensland. So Advanced to Zero is a methodology that started in America a few years ago, has spread around the world. And the zero that we're referring to is what we call functional zero. So that's what we're going for. We know that there will never be no homelessness, but functional zero is when more people are being housed that are coming into homelessness. And then the systems work that we do is coordination and collaboration to ensure that when someone does become homeless, that period of homelessness is rare, brief, and once off.
Mm-hmm.
So not having someone homeless for 2 years or more, and dealing with all of those aspects which have impacted on that person's life, which may have caused homelessness. So, substance use, mental health, physical health, all of that kind of thing. So getting people around the table, all services working together, because alone we can't do it. Each
Mm.
service in Rockhampton does an amazing job with what they've got, but we're a band-aid. We're addressing what's happened. We're not addressing earlier on, which is where we need to be. If we can catch this before people are in crisis,
Mm.
not only does that make us a better community, but it saves governments money.
Absolutely. And what inspired your journey into doing this work for a living, essentially? Like, this is not a fun place to be. I can imagine it's very rewarding when you do have successful outcomes for people that have entered the system and you're able to successfully help people. I know the current situation around Rockhampton, the state and the country is not amazing when it comes to homeless. What does that journey look like for you to actually enter this world? I mean, you had a fantastic grounding to understand inequality, but what led you down this path?
Honestly, it was kind of an accident.
Mm.
So, many years ago, I was approached about a job at the local youth shelter that Rosebery runs, so Jack's House.
Yep.
I, was already in employment, so I said no, no, no for several months until they kept nagging, and I finally went. So I started off as a casual doing nights and weekends over at Jack's House Youth Shelter, and just absolutely fell in love with the work. Fell in love with working with young people to support them into independent living.
Hmm.
And that was the flame, and that just built my passion for helping people who are homeless or at risk of homeless. And I've never looked back, and that was 9 years ago.
Yeah, wow. And, it is such a big responsibility that I can imagine you have on your shoulders. Of course, there's a lot of support in place for yourself, I'd imagine, and you'd be working with a fantastic team at Rosebery because I do know they do some incredible stuff there. What sort of industry were you in before you moved into this community support type role?
So I was a student advocate out at the
Hmm.
uni. So students who were accused of plagiarism or any of that kind of stuff, I would help them go through that process, so the appeals committee and whatnot. And then prior to that, I worked in Kirsten Livermore's office, the former federal member for Capricornian.
Yep.
So nothing to do with homelessness in the
No, but
background, just
a very good connection into the community, I would imagine,
yeah,
being in a
definitely.
political office. Yes, fantastic. So, you being born and bred in Rocky and going to school at Kawarral and Yeppoon, what does this region mean to you? Like, there's, Capricorn Coast, Rockhampton, but what does it mean to you to be in Rocky and part of this community in such a big way?
Yeah, I mean, Rocky's home. I love everything about Rockhampton except the heat.
There's
That's the
aircon
only
for that.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. Like, I know it's easy to say you were born and bred here, so, but I've traveled extensively, been to so many places. Rocky's just it's not too small, it's not too big. There's a sense of community. People know each other, people look out for each other. You won't find that in Brisbane. You absolutely won't
Mm,
find that in Sydney. Like it's and even just down the road at Gladstone, Rocky's very different. You
mm.
know? Yeah. There's just something about Rocky that just, regardless of where I am around Australia, you just can't wait to get back.
Absolutely agree. Yes. And so what is like working with the community that we have here, you obviously get to tap in and connect with them in a quite a intimate way, professionally, of course. What does it mean for the people that you help serve with regards to being homeless and getting them help and, seeing your community on a journey of success, for example? So when you're successfully able to work with someone and help someone to change the direction that they're in.
I mean, that's the core. That's what keeps me coming back is, seeing someone go from what is ultimately the lowest point of their life
Mm,
and be able to support them to move into a better situation and support them in a number of ways. And that support doesn't just stop when you put someone into a house,
mm,
and continuing that support, linking them in with the services that they need to be linked in with. That's the reward. And that's, just knowing that you have assisted someone through one of the worst periods of their life,
mm.
that definitely keeps me going. That fuels me.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be very rewarding. Do you ever manage to catch up with people that you've helped in the past, like just in passing, of course, not in a formal capacity, but where you've been able to really see like a complete 180 on where you saw them and where they are now?
Yeah, definitely. Not as often as I would like. But yeah,
Mm,
you definitely come across people, can be years later, and they run up to you with excitement to share what's happened since you've seen them. And they might, have a child that they've got that they want to introduce to you and all of this kind
mm.
of stuff. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, wonderful. So, thinking about everything that you've been through in life, whether it be in the current capacity or previous roles or even growing up, have you got one defining moment that's, happened, whether it be a massive challenge that you've had to overcome or whether it's been a really proud moment where it really stands out for you to go, this was a pivotal moment in my life that's really shaped the direction that I'm on right now?
I think the proudest, well, two for me, I would say, and they're quite recent ones. So one
Mm,
is starting the CQ Zero project, and the work that it is doing and will continue to do to really prevent, reduce, and end homelessness, and that is the goal to end rough sleeping by 2035.
mm,
But that's what we're working towards. And then I think again recently, last year, I held the very first Central Queensland Health, Housing and Homelessness Forum, bringing together the homelessness sector and the health sector to really build that collaboration. Collaboration is not something that Rockhampton, particularly amongst community services, has done that well historically.
mhm,
It's definitely something that's been a key point of mine to push. As I said before, alone we can't do that much, but if we work
mhm.
together, we can achieve so much. So I also chair the Central Queensland Housing and Homelessness Network. And yeah, getting people together, operating off the same spreadsheet to achieve the same goal, combining all of our limited resources to try and really address the problem from a real Central Queensland basis.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And, before we started recording, of course, you shared a little bit about that project, CQ Zero, the funding that came through and getting that off the ground. That is a massive accomplishment. And I can imagine the difference that you've made in a very short period of time, let alone what's to come in the next couple of years as you work towards, sorry, you and everyone works towards the 2035 goal.
Yeah, and I've seen what zero communities can do in other centres. So I guess the other point with CQ Zero is the first time it's actually been done in a regional centre. So
Wow.
all of the previous ones have been done in larger centres like Brisbane
Mhm.
0, Sydney 0, Adelaide 0, for example. So this was the first one in that regional context, which means you have to adjust it a little bit to take into
Mhm.
account the regional context, but also, the differences between Rockhampton and Gladstone, Rockhampton and Emerald, and all of that kind of stuff. It really is a place-based response. So we're bringing a proven methodology, but we are tailoring it for Central Queensland.
I love that because the worst thing that often happens to regional communities is where a plug and play model that might work in a city is plonked into a regional town and everyone wonders why it's not working.
Yeah, 100%. And we've all seen that so many times. The government says, you're all
So
going to
many
do it like
times.
this. Yeah.
Yes, so many times. We could probably have an entire podcast dedicated to it. So, of course, we've spoken a lot about how rewarding this type of work is for you, but, I can imagine there are some extremely hard days. And I do want to thank you as well for very publicly sharing a very hard day of yours recently on LinkedIn. It was extremely brave, very inspirational. And as someone who'd only just connected with you, I felt really lucky and privileged to be able to read that sort of an insight that you shared. That was a really overwhelming and challenging day for you when you just felt so defeated. What is it in this work, in your life? You obviously have a life outside of work as well, and you've got a family to take care of and spend time with, and then you've got friends, of course, and juggling all of that. But what is the thing that keeps you going every day? So when you woke up after posting the post that I'm referring to on LinkedIn, and you woke up the next day, instead of being defeated and going, oh, what's the point? Because, yesterday X, Y, and Z happened. What made you keep getting up and going in and doing the work that you're obviously so good at doing?
Yeah. Well, you've got to be, to work in this industry, you've got to be resilient. You've got to bounce back. The frustrations are daily, but it's knowing that even though you can't physically help every single person, you are putting in the maximum effort to help as many people as you can. So,
Mhm.
nobody wants to see anybody homeless. And for me, my frustration was all around not being able to house a family with a young child who was on the streets because
Mhm.
there was just no capacity anywhere for them. And that kind of stuff, I don't want to see anyone homeless, but particularly children like that. That really gets my emotional juices going, so to speak.
Mm,
So, but I think, that post, not only was it a bit of a release, like I
mm,
certainly didn't do it for sympathy or anything like that. It was just an expression of my frustration in the system.
mm,
And I had a lot of messages from people across Australia after that, checking in on me, all of
mm,
that kind of stuff, keep going, all of that. And it is knowing that I am making a difference and I
mm,
want to continue making a difference. And just because the system is failing now doesn't mean that I can't try to build a better system that isn't failing people down the track.
absolutely. And yeah, I'm so glad to hear. And I would imagine that did happen as well, that so many people reached out to you. And it is really brave to just put it out there into the world and go, you know what? This did not go to plan today. We see lots of awards, recognition, promotions, people writing things that don't make any sense, and just leadership insight that's been written by AI that's filling LinkedIn at the moment. But what you wrote was real. It was honest. It was raw. It was amazing to connect with. And ever since I read it, I was so excited to have you on the podcast and talk about a topic that a lot of people would wish didn't exist, but it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that support. That's really nice.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to the next generation coming along after us, whether it be life advice, with all of the experience that you have and all of the visibility of our community in very vulnerable positions, what advice would you give to the next generation?
I love these questions. They're so amazing. I'd say don't confuse activity with impact. So
Mm,
being busy, passionate, or well intentioned isn't the same as making change. I'd say pay attention to outcomes in my field. Definitely listen to lived experience. So
mhm,
those who have been before and have experienced that, what helped them to get out of the situation. Becoming much a bigger thing today is actually listening to lived experience. When I started, it wasn't really a thing. Don't
mm,
ask me why. Why would you not talk to the people who've been there, done that, and what would have helped them? the sector is much better at that now. We are doing that really well. So that's a big one. But be willing to challenge structures and systems. Just
Mm.
because something is this way doesn't mean we have to accept it. Um, and be that voice for people that don't have a voice.
Absolutely fantastic advice. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, and I'm so thankful for your time. I know how busy you are. I know how many meetings you are attending across a week, and of course, how many people are out there that are waiting for your help and support. When you were talking earlier, it reminded me of a saying that I really love, which is because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as people, and you feel like you want to change the world, but you can't. But to one person, you can change their entire world. And when you were speaking earlier, it just reminded me of that. I can't help everybody, but the people that you can help, you are changing their entire world. And yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. And thanks for having me on.
You are very welcome. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Rockhampton with Nyree Johnson, proudly brought to you by Marketing Unagency Co., the marketing team who do things very differently and who are determined to make the world of marketing less chaotic and far clearer for small businesses and community groups.